Welcome to Relentless Truth with John Warren, the podcast that extracts truth from a wide range of topics, revealing who God is, who we are, and how we relate to each other. Now, here's John with this week's powerful and practical insights.
Welcome to Relentless Truth. I'm John Warren. It's good to be with you. Please like, share, review, and subscribe to Relentless Truth, to this podcast. And for more information about our work, go to johnwarrenmedia.com. Our guest today is a very special guest, my good friend Hank Hanegraaff. Hank is president and chairman of the board of the North Carolina-based Christian Research Institute. He's also host of the nationally syndicated Bible Answer Man broadcast, as well as the Hank Unplugged Podcast. He's widely regarded as one of the world's leading Christian authors and apologists. Through his live call-in radio broadcast, Hank equips Christians to mine the Bible for all its wealth and answers questions on the basis of careful research and sound reasoning. And through the Hank Unplugged podcast, he interviews today's most significant Christian leaders, apologists, and thinkers. He's the author of more than 20 books with more than 1 million copies in print, and 2019 saw the release of his book, Truth Matters, Life Matters More, The Unexpected Beauty of an Authentic Christian Life. He's a regular contributor to the award-winning Christian Research Journal and an articulate communicator on the pressing issues of our day, having spoken in leading churches, conferences, and on college campuses throughout the world. Hank and his wife, Kathy, live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they're parents to 12 children. Hank, welcome.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that long and very kind introduction.
Well, I didn't think the man, the myth, the legend would be enough. Well, I really do appreciate you being here. And I, as well known as you are for the Bible Answer Man broadcast, and I should say that, my wife and I listened to, as you know, your broadcast 30-some years ago, and would drive home from work, she from the hospital, me from the bank, and would compare notes. And that was part of a process that where God began to work in our lives to get us to probe more deeply. And it's amazing how we would say, "Can you believe that guy from California said this today?" But I know you're well known for that, for your books that you've written and other aspects of your work, but I think our listeners would enjoy getting to know you a bit. And I'm wondering if you would start by just kind of giving us an overview of the life of Hank Hanegraaff, if you would.
Yeah, I can do that. First of all, let me say that I love the name of your podcast, Relentless Truth. I mean, we live in a post-truth culture, a culture in which truth is so obscure and falsehood so established that unless you love the truth, you cannot know it. So to have a podcast that is committed to relentless truth, to exploding the mythology that envelops so much of our culture and is leading to the demise of Western civilization, I think is transcendently important. In terms of my own life, I was born in the Netherlands, so I'm Dutch. Dutch is my first language. We immigrated when I was 3 to Canada, and then when I was 14 to the United States. And I suppose most of my early life, as I think back on it, is characterized by questions. I was constantly asking questions. And one of the things I remember, John, the most is not receiving satisfactory answers to my questions. And as a result of that, I actually walked away from the Christian faith. I grew up in the Christian faith. I walked away from the Christian faith. And for all intents and purposes, I became a practical atheist. Not an atheist in the truest sense of the word, but a practical atheist, someone who was practicing the tenets of atheism, who was living as though there is no God.
Hank, let me ask you this, because in my experience with high school young people, we encounter this and we're concerned about that. I didn't remember that about your story, but roughly what age were you when you went through that period?
It started when I was age 14.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was in 1964. And, there's so many things that were happening at that time. You had around that period of time, you had the assassination of John F. Kennedy. You had the Beatles, who were questioning their Christian faith. And all of that led to questions that I would ask my teachers, my pastor, and my parents. And when I didn't get satisfactory answers, my assumption was there are no satisfactory answers. And that led me to leaving the Christian faith for quite a long period of time, actually until I was 29. And when I was 29 years of age, 3 people who had intended to knock on my neighbor's door knocked on my door. And they, in a sort of a halting, stumbling fashion, began to communicate the gospel to me. Well, I'd come out of a Christian background, so I'd ask them questions that would stump them. And they, in a very modest way, just said, look, we don't know the answer to that question, but we are having a seminar at our church next Saturday on the issue of origins. And anyway, I ended up going to that seminar, and that started my trek back into Christianity, because what I say now, John, I'm sure you've heard me say this many times, how one views their origins ultimately will determine how they live their life. If you believe that you're a function of random chance, that you arose from the primordial slime, you're going to live your life by a different standard than if you know you're created in the image of God and thus accountable to Him.
That's exactly right.
So this matter of origins has become for me the foundational issue on which all of truth rests, the fact that God created the universe. And this is a self-evident truth. In other words, if you look at the Old Testament, King David, the quintessential king of Israel, said that the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of His hands. Day after day they pour forth speech, night after night they proclaim knowledge. There's no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their words go out to the ends of the earth. In other words, if you look at the night sky, you know there has to be a creator. Design presupposes a designer.
That's right.
But the Apostle Paul in the New Testament said much the same. He said, God's eternal power, divine nature, clearly seen through what has been made, so that men are without excuse. So we have the light of creation, and we can either suppress that light in unrighteousness, or we can submit our lives to it and then find true joy and happiness.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, and tell me from there, Hank, how did I don't know the genesis of your ministry, and I know it's multifaceted, and that requires a long answer, but from that point in your life, what transpired to prompt you to employ yourself in this apologetics work that you do so well?
Yeah, well, one of the first things that I did as a new Christian is I learned how to communicate the gospel, and I learned that through a program at a Presbyterian church, Coral Ridge Presbyterian in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Yep.
Which was great. I lived right on the steeple, actually, of the church. And so I went to that church, and that's where I heard that message on origins as well, where it was actually sort of a debate. But I, in that process of learning to share my faith, learned it not just academically, but experientially, because in the program that was popular at that time called Evangelism Explosion, you would not only learn in classroom, but you'd also go out in the highways and the byways, and you would take what you were learning and you would put it into practice. Mm-hmm. And so I found out through that process that people were really hungry for answers. Eventually, Walter Martin, who's the president of and founder of the Christian Research Institute, wanted me to take my prowess in memorization and apply that to learning how the cults deviated from the historic Christian faith, make that memorable for people. And eventually, in spending a lot of time with him and working with him on projects, he asked me to become president of the Christian Research Institute. And not long after that, he died. So then there was not a whole lot of choice except to pick up the mantle and move forward.
And approximately what year was that, roughly?
Yeah, it was 1988. The end of 1988, beginning of 1989, that I became president of the Christian Research Institute. And, one of the feature programs and ministry outreach for the Christian Research Institute is a broadcast called the Bible Answer Man broadcast. And on that broadcast, you just answer people's questions. So
Right.
essentially, the phone lines light up and you answer people's questions. And that really was the stock and trade of the ministry in terms of a focal ministry outreach for almost 40 years. Many years that Walter Martin did it, and then, I've done it over 3 decades myself. So answering questions was essentially what my identity revolved around, I should say. It became what I was known for. And people always say, "Oh, you're the Bible Answer Man." I'd always say, "No, I'm not the Bible Answer Man. I'm the host of a broadcast called the Bible Answer Man broadcast."
Thanks for listening to Relentless Truth with John Warren. Please consider sharing this podcast and subscribe to receive future episodes. Connect with John regarding your comments, questions, and show ideas through johnwarrenmedia.com or at John Warren Media on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. That's all for this episode. Join us next week for another edition of Relentless Truth with John Warren.